Hello, listeners. Episode 250 of Retro Encounter is on the horizon, and we are doing a mailbag episode. Please send emails to the address retro@rpgfan.com, and on episode 250, we will read aloud and respond to as many emails as we can. The questions can be whatever you like, but we especially want recommendations for games to play on the podcast, because we will be choosing one game suggestion from episode 250 for a Retro Encounter episode later this year. Now here is the latest episode of Retro Encounter. Hello and welcome to episode 247 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and in the second half of July, the topic has been Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, the Super Famicom turned Saturn turned PlayStation turned PSP RPG that has a lot of very passionate fans. Let's talk about who's actually here speaking in person, starting with Nilson Carroll.
Hello.
And Joe Padilla.
Howdy.
And Zach Wilkerson.
Hey-o.
All right, so Nilson is a Tactics Ogre veteran here, but this is the first run of Let Us Cling Together for Joe, Zach, and I. And with no shade to Nilson, I think we should hear the perspective from the new players. We all managed to finish this game. Each of us picked a different story path. So for starting with you, Zach, you went the neutral ending.
I did.
Did you try any other story paths? And what were your sort of impressions of Tactics Ogre overall?
In terms of other story paths, I didn't really have time to play around with too much except the chaos to neutral. So it was like chaos second chapter and then neutral third chapter. And then like everyone's in the same boat basically in the final chapter. So I didn't have too much time to play around with that. I played around with a little bit of the side content, but there is so much side content that opens up like almost like right before the ending of this game, and like most of it seems to be for post game, and I didn't play around with that too much.
We will get to that, and but for now, Joe, same question. What was your overall impression, and did you mess around with any story paths besides Law, which I know is the one you chose?
Yeah, I didn't really mess around with other story paths. Overall impressions, though, when I first started this game, I was really liking it. Then, kind of in, I guess, a bit of the middle of it, I fell off it a bit and just played Persona for a while. But by the end, I was like, yep, I really like this game. So it stuck the landing for me in a lot of ways.
I think I basically agree with separate points that each of you made. Joe, you are, like you, I enjoyed this game overall. I thought it was a really satisfying strategy RPG, especially with a lot of the story notes it hits. But parts of it do drag. Like, there are parts, maybe in the middle or maybe in the last third of the game, where, I don't know, you're in a situation like, I am fighting 6 octopi, and they are all strong against every attack I have, and I'm stronger than they are, and I'm gonna win, but it's gonna be a grind because I deal less than 5% of their health with every hit. And it's just, some of the map design feels like I'm just walking up a death staircase with the enemy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, with the enemy at higher elevations and just providing annoying terrain and battle resistance. And there are exploits you can do, and there's a stratagem or a skill for almost every situation. But that requires a level of preparedness that I frankly was not prepared for most of the time. And I brute forced not every battle in the second half, but a non-trivial number of them. And to Zach's point, a lot of this game is backloaded. Almost all of the important side quests are in Chapter 4, and many of them are at higher levels than the final boss and are intended to be done in a post-game. And I think we're just going to jump ahead to a little bit. The post-game of Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together is not essential, but I think the designers really want you to play it. because I one of the end game side quests is called the Six Shrines, or or like the Ultimate Magics. I forget. There's a special word for them. It was like apostica or something. I feel bad for forgetting, but I did about half of that side quest, but then eventually just got a little fatigued and decided to beat the game instead. But there's that side quest, a 100 floor Palace of the Dead side quest, multiple character recruitment side quests, and that with entire subplots surrounding them that are leveled after the final battle. And after you beat the game, you unlock the world system, which allows you to jump anywhere on the timeline to experience different parts of the story and make different choices. And those parts of the game are so robust. And in the PSP version, there's a section called Coda, which continues the story after the game is over. I didn't touch that at all, but I almost feel like I shortchanged myself, sort of just beating the game and mostly stopping, because they set such a large banquet for you in terms of post game and end game content that I wonder if it's if they I feel like Matsuno et al. Really wants you to play that, and maybe you haven't even fully experienced Let Us Cling Together if you pass on it as I did. Nilson, you have played all of that side end game side content before. Definitely, yeah, definitely when you first played the game, and maybe at least a little bit during this playthrough as well. How crucial do you think it is?
It's nice that it's a game that you can play through once and like get the story. Like I think we all did this time, like kind of just got through it and saw the story, but there's a lot of depth to it. Like if you want to dig deep, and like you can either play the game for like, I don't know, like 35 hours, or you could play it for like 150 hours and really like get like the perfect team and go through like the Palace of the Dead like 100%. But it's probably not necessary. I think it's only if you're like really digging the systems already that you would like want to spend all that time to do it.
Apocrypha. That's the name of the Ultimate Magic quest that I was in the middle of doing. I remembered it just partway through your explanation, Nilson. But you're right. You can plumb the depth of this game as much as you want. And when I was unlocking those magic spells, the bosses were around level 25, I think. And if you replay those temple dungeons, you get level 35 or 40 versions of the same spell. And the final boss of the game, I think, is level 25, but you get a level 30 required sword just before fighting him. So there are paths and bullet points for post game content that are shown to you very clearly. But like you said, I was basically done after playing through it once, but there's a lot more to play with if the player wants to continue. Zach, exactly how much endgame did you do?
I didn't do much of it. I recruited maybe one or two additional characters, and I did a couple of the side missions. But part of that was because I hadn't been using a dragoon, and I was like, yeah, I should probably use a dragoon because like they're important against monsters. Because I was brute forcing before you. Like there was a fight, and we'll talk about this, where I tried it 40 different times, and I grinded like crazy for it, and I still couldn't do it. But I was always brute forcing like everything because like my ninjas and my archers just carried the day. But for the most part, I didn't do a ton of it. But like the end game was like a cinch for me, even with that.
Yeah, but for me it was archers and enchantresses that I used for most of the whole game. I recruited all four sisters, Saria, Olivia, uh, Sherry, and the one I didn't use as much.
Christina.
Can we talk about Saria and the neutral route when you're done?
That's right. Zach, you and I had this conversation off air. Saria is maybe the most challenging protect this character quest in the whole game, and
it's impossible.
In neutral route and in chaos route, which I was doing, she just joins automatically.
Yeah, so like there's a fight, and one of the problems with this game is like this game is pretty easy. I think actually, like even if you're at the same level or like a level lower, I think it's not that bad if you're like being even like vaguely conscientious about your skills and what you're doing. But like there's a fight in chapter 3 if you're doing the neutral route, which I think the neutral route has its interesting elements. But there's a fight where you're supposed to save Saria, and she's in the middle of like 8 different enemy units, like up on like at the top of a building, and she's not equipped with any equipment, and she's suicidal, and she just keeps running into them over and over again. And I've read that, like, if you play it after you've done like the law or the chaos route, like, it's not so bad. But in my route, no matter what I did, I tried, and I'm not kidding, I tried 38 times, I counted, to recruit her. It is impossible. Like, everyone, and I don't care what people say online, it's not possible to recruit her.
What people are saying online is nonsense, because they're basically saying, oh, maybe you should save this for a new game plus.
That is actually what, like, maybe 80% of the people say.
That's such a frustrating comment, kind of like, oh, the game gets really good after 30 hours. It's like, well, you just wasted me those first 30 hours. Thanks. Those are pet peeves of mine. But yeah, the AI in this game is abysmal, and sometimes it works in your favor. Like, okay, the enemy commander just walked directly into path of my archers. I guess I'm going to win this fight on turn 3. But also, a lot of the guest character battles, it really feels like they're trying to kill themselves. It took me a couple tries to recruit Aracel in Chapter 2, because I don't know, she just kept flinging herself at zombies, and I had to fly over Canopus with a lobber so he could just chuck potions at her like a very unusual lacrosse player. In order to have her survive that time. I don't love the guest character missions a lot of the time, but
were y'all using the chariot? Like, were you rewinding and such?
Sometimes I tried to. If I had an attack miss, then a lot of the time I would be like, I'm not going to rewind this because I earned that miss. I took a calculated risk, and I don't want to use a chariot like save states.
In the 38 tries that I had, I used it in almost all of them, and it still didn't work.
Listeners, in case you're having a little bit of terminology confusion, the chariot refers to a system where you can use the L button on the PSP or Vita to rewind turns and replay parts of battles. It's extremely helpful. You can get very manipulative with it if you want. I think it's even called the Wheel of Fate in the Japanese version, which is the subtitle of the Japanese PSP version. But it's very handy. I tried not to abuse it, but if something went really badly for me, or if I immediately regretted something I did, I would use it. But I tried not to abuse it, because then I felt like it felt a little dirty if I was trying to game the system too much. But yeah, it's possible to play through every part of the game in a single playthrough using the world system, which is, a little bit like I've recently, in the past year or two, replayed the entire Zero Escape series and AI the Somnium Files, which are both story-driven games where you jump around a timeline at your whim, and this seems like a strategy RPG version of that, which is cool, but it's just, this game is so dense that I was not interested in revisiting it right after beating the game. But let's rewind time a little bit, use our own version of the chariot, and go to Chapter 3. So Joe was on Law, I was on Chaos, and Zach, you were on Neutral. Joe, I want you to go last, because I think the Law route is maybe the most satisfying version of this. In Chapter 3, you're basically still pursued by multiple forces, and you finally have final confrontations with Leonar and Vice, and basically Vice has become such a sadistic rage monster that he betrays the he betrays the Duke, then gets betrayed by Lotus, then gets turned over to his own Wallister people, and you see him executed in a sort of a Greek tragedy, curtain rolls, off-screen scream kind of situation. And Leonar, Joe was talking about how the confrontation between Denim and Leonar, either late in Chapter 2 or early in Chapter 3, Law Path, was a really poignant moment. It's almost the opposite in Chapter 3. When you're fighting him, he's sort of disappointed in you, because the choices you make in the Chaos route are following your heart over doing what's best for your faction, and he thinks it's not very knightly and not very practical. He basically thinks you're an impetuous child and tells you as such, but knows that you have a command of the rebellion and are an important figure to the rebellion, so you and he can't coexist. So he in an almost a sad dad saying there can only be one. You have a fight against him and his crew, and it's nothing like the challenging Vice duel. He goes down pretty easy, but I think it's a similar confrontation to the Law route, but instead of doing it and secretly hoping that Denham's the winner, he's doing it because Denham needs to be put down, and but you beat him. Obviously, it was a sort of dissatisfying, sad version of the confrontation that Joe made to sound really cool in your path. But Zach, exactly what happens to that faction in the neutral route? Because basically at the end of chapter 2, you decide to reunite against a common foe with the Wallisters and the Duke.
Yeah, so you rejoin with the Duke, and Vice is basically just goes off the rails in the neutral route. And Vice actually is the one who assassinates the Duke in the neutral route, right?
Yeah, in both neutral and chaos, I think, or at least
Okay.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true in chaos.
Yeah. So he assassinates the Duke, and he becomes sort of a cartoonish villain in terms of like his efforts to take down the Wallisters because he's just angry all the time. And so because of that, he doesn't get a lot of play actually in the neutral route. Like he's not around a lot. Like your first goal when you go on the neutral route and you rejoin the Duke is go hunt down Vice and take him down. And then in the process, Vice takes the Duke down, and then you eventually take Vice down, not in a duel necessarily, but he's just sort of like this like nebulous villain who has this ridiculous character portrait that I can't even really compare.
Yeah, he has twisted rage face and is basically a revenge monster. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like in terms of the neutral route, Vice is really a cartoon villain. I think there's some interesting things about the neutral route, but I'm not really sure that Vice is one of them.
Now, we did go over this a little bit in the previous episode, but Joe, Vice is characterized very differently in the Law route. That's correct?
Yeah, I mean, in the Law route, Vice kind of forms like the sort of he butts heads with Dunham, has sort of rivalry with him. He forms like a new Wallster alliance after Balma Musa. And eventually he and Denham, after Leonard, they kind of form back together, and he rejoins the band along with Aracel. Although she wasn't there before, but they both join up.
Yeah,
At that time.
Aracel joins in chapter 2 in the chaos and neutral routes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
she has to survive a couple of those guest missions that Zach loves so dearly.
Yeah, it's from what it sounds like, I feel like the Law route was probably easier than chaos or neutral. Because I didn't, I used Chariot a pretty liberally throughout this playthrough, but I didn't have to redo any battles or anything. And so Vice joins back up and he just kind of matures and is ready to sacrifice for what he thinks the common good to be. And so he's just kind of there. He doesn't really have much after he rejoins, but he's a good boy.
Yeah, if I were to replay this game, my first choice would be to finish this Apocrypha side quest to finally unlock the Shaman class, and then go back and do the Law route, because that does seem like, if maybe not necessarily the true route of this game, it looks like the most satisfyingly designed, because in the Chaos route, I felt like Denham was sort of angry and passionate, but the story situations weren't as interesting, and Vice and Leonard almost became non-characters. When in Law, it's the flip side of that. It's like it's maybe a slightly colder Denham, more fit to rule, and you get more out of Vice and Leonard and possibly others. So
Yeah.
I without real knowledge of all of the nuances between routes, I think Law route is maybe sort of the way to go if you were playing this for the first time.
Probably. I mean, I think there's a pretty good amount of strong characterization in it. There's some stuff that still doesn't quite make sense, like in Mara, and we'll talk more about Kachua, but some of her story stuff doesn't really make much sense. But I overall really like the law route.
I feel like just on like forums and stuff, the law route is like known as the one that has the best plot. People really like suggest doing the law route, like to get into the plot.
So it's not just Ravenous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it might be for some people. But yeah, I think.
But there's no way I could have made that decision at the end of chapter 1.
That would be terrible.
Yeah, it's
I'm not slaughtering a village of innocent people for any reason.
Zach, do you just think you're better than me or something?
I don't, Joe.
He just makes better decisions than you, Joe.
Well,
but
fine.
I still admire the balls of this game to have the sort of best outcome coming from slaughtering a village of innocents. That is subversive and pretty dark. But me playing this game intending to just sort of follow my heart, knowing that there was multiple routes, I had to pick Chaos route for that first decision. Now that I'm a cold, heartless Tactics Ogre veteran, I'll totally go and pick law route every time. But I really think that's maybe, other than what happens to Kachua, that's maybe the most impactful feeling decision in the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
In the Chaos route, isn't it basically just that, like, even though you didn't commit the massacre, everyone's like, find Denim, he did the massacre, and you just keep trying to tell people, like, no, I didn't.
Yes, that's basically
what I've heard.
The first couple fights, are you trying to...
That's totally true, yeah.
The first couple of fights, are you trying to convince Aracel, no, I didn't actually kill your friends. Here, watch me be a good person for 4 missions. And then it ends up you confronting Leonar, who's Aracel's fiance, and having him admit to her that, yes, he ordered the massacre, which gets Aracel to join your party, which is one of the better character moments in Chaos Route. But... the routes basically all come together in Chapter 4, with only a few character differences in non-present cutscenes being the change, with the biggest change of all being the Loslorien Knights manipulating Kachua. This might go differently on Chaos or Neutral, but throughout Chapter 4 and parts of Chapter 3, Kachua is just furious with her brother for the decisions that Denham's been making, and ends with her... decide with the Lancelot, the bad Lancelot Tartarus, telling her that she is the illegitimate daughter of King Dorgalua, whose name I'm definitely saying wrong. What's our stance on how to pronounce that name?
Anyway you slice it, it just doesn't sound appealing.
Dorgalua.
Yeah,
Dorgalua.
It's a bad name.
Yeah, so King Dorg, maybe he's related to the Imperial Norg. So that he reveals that Kachua is the illegitimate daughter of King Dorgalua, who was the Bakram king that sort of united all of the different tribes and nations on the island, and she could be a possible figurehead that would unite all of these warring factions into a single Valeria again, and because Kachua was so pissed off at Denham for parts of Chapter 3 and most of Chapter 4, she sort of goes along with it. She even dresses in black, like with symbolism as clear as a 1960s Western movie. And basically, in the version I played, in the Chaos route, Denham had to run to her after you have a fight with Lancelot in the capital, which is, I think, is it Grail? Or Heim, that's what it is. Yeah. You fight Lancelot in Heim and have a confrontation with Kachua, and this is where it gets a little confusing, because I checked a guide to make sure I did it right, and I think if you sort of admit wrongdoing and beg to get back with her, then she will rejoin you in Chaos route. But if you're in law route, you have to say, "I never betrayed you," and ask her to come back to you. I could be framing that a little
I
incorrectly, but
I think it is based on a response that you have earlier about like at least in neutral route.
oh yeah, right. When you're talking to the head of the church guy,
Yeah, about whether you would take her down or not, and like you have to do like the opposite of that. Like your response that is required in that is based on the response that is required earlier. Nilson would know better than me, but yes.
yeah, depending on which route you're on and the outcome of that conversation, you have to say either one thing or the opposite thing to Kachua after the fight with Lancelot. And the two outcomes are Kachua rejoins your party. You set her up to be the monarch of all of Valeria. She unlocks the princess class, which is very powerful, and you sort of go on to the end game. And the other way around that is Kachua, in total despair, commits suicide, and Denham becomes the sort of regent of this army that is about to take over Valeria, and you unlock the Lord class for him.
Yeah.
And I think there's another path that involves sort of taking a dark angle to it, and you unlock a dark priest cast. That's like an offensive spellcaster for Kachua that I'd have to check a guide to see how that works. But basically, the outcome of the cutscene after you fight Lancelot is, will Kachua commit suicide and then become a lord, or Kachua sort of become the de facto empress and rejoin your party?
Yeah, for this for this part in that decision and dialogue, I just put in my notes a choice: gaslight my sister or let her commit suicide. Like, like if just I
Yeah.
mean, I chose I chose the path where yes, I wasn't sure like what the outcomes would be, so I didn't look this up, but I was just like, yeah, I had Denham say, I'm sorry, you felt, this, you felt like this, and I promised to be better. And then she just like killed herself. I was like, okay. So I guess I was supposed to say that I never did anything wrong, and then you'd like rejoin because you'd be like, oh yeah, you didn't do anything wrong. Like what?
I was in a similar situation. I mentioned I checked a guide, but the reason I checked a guide was because she committed suicide in front of me, and I gasped. So I checked the guide to see if there was something I could have done differently, and basically I said to her, I've always been there for you, but I was supposed to say the opposite because we had that schism in chapter 3. I think I had to agree with her that I had made a mistake, but it's confusing. The response where I was sort of trying to win her back ended up being the thing that caused her to stab herself. So but I didn't want that outcome. So I checked a guide to see what was going on and reloaded the save and got her to rejoin my party. Because I mean, unlocking a super dope class for Denham is appealing, but it's not what I wanted for this playthrough. So it was really the only story decision I went back on.
I mean, unlocking the Lord class is, I think, useful like in post, but like I let Kachua kill herself. I wasn't following a guide through like chapter 3 or 4, and the Lord class was useless to me because like it's just about pulling skills from other classes, and my Denim Ninja was still way stronger at that point.
Is it kind of like an onion knight in FFT?
I mean basically you
Mm-hmm.
can pick up any skill from any class. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a little different in Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions version. I think the Onion Knight has bad stats until you class level it up to level 8, in which point it has insane stats, but it can equip any skill and use any weapon. So it's a similar concept to that. And we should mention that, I mean, both of those are Matsuno games, and Matsuno in both FF Tactics and FF12 and this, but maybe especially this, has some really esoteric, arcane means of unlocking things that I found sometimes charming and sometimes annoying. Like, you have to do 6 random battles in special areas, and then go to a dialogue tree, and then fight 6 dungeons in a row to unlock that shaman class that I was halfway through unlocking when I stopped playing. And I mean, if that doesn't make you roll your eyes a little bit, then I don't know what to tell you. there's so he and I don't remember if I mentioned this in the previous episode or not, but to unlock Sherry, she has to survive the fight against her that's early in chapter 4, and then you have to go to this a city that you haven't visited since chapter 3 on a night that when it's raining with Olivia having a loyalty of 3 stars or more with you, and then she'll talk Sherry into joining you. Like that is so ridiculous. I don't know how it can be discovered organically unless you really walk to every nook and cranny.
It's kind of like in not to bring everything back to Tactics, but the in Tactics, where in Final Fantasy Tactics, where you get Agrius's what is it? She gets some sort of accessory, but it's only if you go to a certain place on her birthday.
And Musadio, Lavion, and Alicia all have to be in your party.
Yes. Oh, that seems really cute. But yeah, I mean, but Matsuno loves doing this stuff, and I agree with you that it's sometimes quite endearing, but it's also like this just isn't an organic video game experience. They're so from a gameplay standpoint, like if I'm not looking up a walkthrough or a guide, I'm probably not going to stumble across that. And also just from a development and labor side, if you're putting resources into something that 5%, if that, of players are going to see, like that's pretty frustrating, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a game for like at that level for people that are really into like talking on forums and like looking up like, multiple walkthroughs and like min-maxing their time and like figuring things out like that together. But yeah, like no one's ever gonna recruit her without looking at a guide or like a post or something. There's no way. It's so
Talking
obscure.
about Sherry, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess my question is like, how much of this was true in the Super Nintendo or even PS1 version? And that it was even more difficult. Like, you know what I mean? Like here we can go back and go redo as many things as we want, but like, how would how would you figure that out? And I mean, I know that like SNES games, like even like Final Fantasy VI, would have like these weird like you have to go to this place at this specific time with this specific like crew thing. But like I don't know how true that is here. I guess in terms of the OG version of this game.
I think esoteria in meeting certain conditions and unlocking certain things is true of a lot of JRPGs. Like there's you have to go through some ridiculous steps to get the best equipment in Lunar. Zach, remember you have to like
Yes, it's true in Tales of Vesperia too. It's ridiculous in Tales of Vesperia.
yeah. The Tales of Vesperia has the Brionac spear, which is a real ridiculous thing to unlock, and that's bringing this podcast to the early 2019 in Retro Encounter. But let's go back to early 2017 and late 2017 in Retro Encounter. We did some episodes on Final Fantasy 12, another Matsuno game, and maybe he's committed the worst sin of his whole career.
The OG version of this,
with the OG Zodiac spear. Four treasure chests, unmarked, unremarkable, regular ass treasure chests that you are not allowed to unlock. Not allowed to open. Over the entire course of the game, and then go to a 5th treasure chest in a optional late game dungeon and open that one. And if the previous 4 chests are still closed, then you get the best spear in the whole game. I played Final Fantasy 12 long after it was in the moment, so I knew about that, and I even checked a guide to make sure I could get it. I played it on the PS2, but several years after it came out, but. Furious is too strong a word. I was so annoyed that I had to not open treasure chests. As a JRPG player, as a video game player, my instinct is, of course, I want to open the treasure chest.
Totally.
And
have you ever seen the strategy, like the official strategy guide for Final Fantasy 12? It's like so thick. Like it's such a tome of information. And I feel like that's what, like he loves that. Like he wants you like studying and like looking at all these charts and like feeling like you're always like kind of making like the wrong decisions. And just like you're turned into a scholar. He turns you into a scholar to like play his games, and like that's really cool. Also frustrating.
And we talked about the Warren Report in the previous episode. There's so much background information in this. If you go into the Warren Report before the final battle, it'll teach you about the history of the war between the five kingdoms. Like Heim was one of the kingdoms that led to the rule of King Dorgalwa. And I feel like Matsuno put so much planning into everything from the politics heavy story to the mechanics heavy combat to the super weird unlocking of content, and he wants you to play the game through multiple times, especially prior to the PSP version, to see all of the writing and all of the ideas that went into this game. It's such a dense game that is somewhat demanding of its players, but players that are of a similar mindset to Matsuno or appreciate the detail Matsuno puts in will absolutely love it because there is so much passion in detail.
There is, and this also, I think his crafting system in this, maybe not just his, but the crafting system in this is also one of those things where it's like it can be quite useful and it can make your weapons more powerful. Like as when I was in the end game portions, I had plus one siege bows, and whenever they hit something, they bound them, which was super useful. But crafting those is time consuming and kind of annoying. And there's been this problem as well in Vagrant Story and in Final Fantasy 12 with the license board equipping things, which can be kind of funny, but is also rather strange when it takes so long to unlock, I know, a gauntlet, but you can use the best, the best weapon for your class or something. It's not the best. It's not the best utilization of crafting and equipping systems.
I one of the ores that is required for several weapons in the late game is Woot's ore, and to go from the ore you can buy in the shop to a single bar of Woot's ore, maybe it's a Woot's ingot, is I think 38 crafting steps. And you can't mass craft, like even something like turning inferior ore to iron or iron ore to iron ingots, which has a 100% success rate. You have to do them one at a time, and that is just why it's like crafting is a system worth exploring in this game to get the most out of your weapons and the most out of your units. But oh boy, like the process of crafting is laborious in this game. There's so many ways they could have improved it that they just chose not to.
Yeah, I mean, before I went into the Hanging Gardens, which is the last area in the game, I spent 2 hours just crafting, like, and just trying to max out the
Two
money that I
hours?
had. 2 hours, yeah.
That is wild. I didn't craft a single time in this game.
Oh my God,
I
yeah.
probably I
Not
probably
once.
went through 3 full episodes of Murder She Wrote just crafting in this game.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
and it is, and it at a certain point it does give you some sort of satisfaction, and it can be pretty powerful what you can do by just making a plus one weapon. But yeah, I just wish it was faster.
Yeah, even just like the amount of button clicks you need to like upgrade your crossbow to crossbow +1 is like way too many.
Yeah, just for Wootsor, that's 38 stages, which is probably 4 or 5 clicks at least per stage. That those really add up.
Yeah.
And like Joe mentioned, crafting is useful and powerful, but it's just laborious. And also the success rate for advanced equipment gets pretty low, like in the 40 to 50% range, which invites save scumming, which I absolutely did when the crafting rate got below 90. And that's just again, I think Matsuno wants you to experience everything in this game, but also wants you to put in the work. So a lot of it is sort of bound to end game, or has ridiculous unlock requirements, or necessitates you to replay parts of the game. And some fans will love that, and in a different mindset, I would probably love that. But with me, wanting to get to other games in my list and wanting to prepare for other podcasts, I I declined to go to really go the distance in Tactics Ogre. My playtime ended up being right at 50 hours, um, which is only scratching the surface of the end game. But well, speaking of end game, let's talk about the story a little bit more. Whether Kachua rejoins you or not, the the Knights of Lotus that are present in Heim reveal that their plan overall was to get the is it the Brynhildr? Yeah, the sacred sword. Yeah, the Brynhildr, the sacred sword that the knights from Zenobia were looking for, and use the sword to open a gate to hell that is underneath the Hanging Gardens, which was sort of like a special residence of King Dorgalawa. And if Kachua is in your party when you get the Brynhildr from Lancelot at the end of the fights in Heim, she can equip it if she's level 30, which is nice, but I don't know if it's totally necessary. I mean, I think my character's in the level 26, 27 range when I beat the game, but it looks like there's a schism within the Knights of Lotus themselves. Lancelot's plan from the beginning was to sort of win a Hearts and Minds campaign with the Valerian people by, you could say befriending, or you could say manipulating Kachua into becoming a new queen, and being the descendant of Dorgalawa should be very accepted by the people. And he was on the path to doing that until Denim interfered. If Kachua does not commit suicide, then basically the same thing happens, but without Lotus's influence. And I think Lancelot and one of the other Lotus Knights wanted to bring Kachua to power, use the sacred sword, possibly with Kachua's assistance, to get to that power underneath the Hanging Gardens, and use the power of the ogres sealed within. But and then also have Kachua as almost like a puppet empress that they could that would be closely tied to Lotus, so that the nation of Lotus would have a staunch ally in Valeria. But when it doesn't go that way, the other knights that are in Lotus, that they sort of betray Lancelot, and they take the Brynhildr and sort of abandon him, and run to the Hanging Gardens to try and get to the power there. And while you're pursuing them, they send monsters and armies after you, just a bunch of Templars. How about fighting so many faceless, classless Templars in the end of this game?
I mean, they all have classes. You just can't see what they are. Which
Yeah,
is actually very frustrating.
and I normally love multicolored characters with face masks, but I was not into it this time.
Speaking of like endgame stuff with, or like the last part of the story with the Bakram, also we found out that Denham's Bakram.
Yeah,
That's wild.
his father was a priest in the capital Heim with that archbishop guy with the four daughters, and with Branton. But then sort of Branton became the regent and was sponsoring a sort of an unseen child character as the puppet emperor. He was using the child to legitimize his rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but we never see the kid himself, and so there's this connection between those three men, and your father tells you all this on your deathbed, and also tells you the truth about Kachua, that she was the illegitimate daughter of the king. And also, one moment I thought was kind of cute, the four sister characters, who at least can all join you on Chaos Route. One of them, Olivia, I think she's got a bit of a crush on Denham, because she says sort of wistfully when you meet her that yeah, the four of us sisters all went different paths, and I stayed with the church to take care of Dad. But I remember when we played as children together in the capital, and at the very end of the game, her father even tells Olivia, "Go to him. I know you've been the well-behaved sister all of these years. Now you deserve some freedom," which I thought was very, very cute. Sort of an understated, unrequited romance plot, but yeah, Denham and uh, Kachua are all either all Bakram or half Bakram. I'm not. But were raised as Wallisters.
I liked that. I liked that they had that in there of Denham being Bakram, him saying, "Well, I'm just gonna kind of continue on my path." It doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
and Olivia, I think, says something along the lines of like, like you were hoping for a kingdom for all of Valeria, right? Not just one kingdom. Um, and I think that kind of speaks to part of the theme in this game is um, just the uselessness of ethnic distinctions in things like this because of how um, it's about what's right. It's about what's just, and it's not about this sort of thought of tribalism or putting ethnic interests above class interests or above the interests um, of the world as a whole. So he's Bakram, but he says, "Well, I'm still going to lead this coalition. I'm going to do my best to make a Valeria that's for all of us." So.
You could even say the message is to cling together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating thing because it goes against the philosophy of lots of JRPGs. Because like the philosophy of lots of JRPGs is like fight for who you are. Like I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 14 lately, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a fairly late game at this point in 2020 storyline where like the idea is that you are going to maintain your own kingdom, your own culture, your own ideas, and that is not really what Tactics Ogre seems to be arguing to me. It seems to be arguing that actually uniformity is best. And I'm not sure that I agree with that particular argument, but I think it's fascinating.
I think uniformity is the wrong word. I would say
Fair enough.
I would say that a lot of JRPGs are individualist, where fighting for what you believe in and fighting for what's right is the most important. And in Tactics Ogre, they reject that a little bit by having that path be the chaos path, which is messy and unsatisfying. But instead of uniform, I would use the word collectivist. Like basically coming together for a common goal and for the best outcome will always be better than people competing for individual outcomes. You could I mean if you add an economic bent to that, you could even make that the argument between communism and capitalism. But I think that more broadly, Tactics Ogre is individualist versus collectivist, and it tries to have a collectivist message to a degree that is not that, like Zach said, is not always true in JRPGs.
And as we had talked a bit last episode about how this game was influenced by the Yugoslav wars, the idea of ethnicity playing into that as well is really important for this because when you look at the Yugoslav wars, yes, there's a Serbia, and yes, mostly there are Serbs there, but in Croatia there's a large Serbian population. When you go to when you're looking at Kosovo or something, there's a large Muslim population, but that doesn't mean that the rights of the minority can be unheeded or something. And it's all about every voice being heard. And I think that's something that this game kind of zeroes in on. But in the ending of it, at least in my ending, it was it didn't exactly turn out well. So
that was true in my ending as well. I mean, Denim is assassinated in my ending.
Same.
So because I let Quechua die, I think is the reason that happens in my ending, at least.
In your ending, Zach, is Denim assassinated by a Wallister rebel?
I believe so. Yeah,
that's what happened in mine. So.
I mean, it's literally like he like the gun goes off and then it cuts to black. It's like very, I don't know. It's very Sopranos.
That's the ending I got as well. And I think with the fact that, at least in my playthrough, I let 5,000 innocent Wallisters be murdered. I kind of felt that peace had returned to this land and that Denim kind of deserved a fitting end like that.
So. I got a pretty good ending, I guess, because mine ends with Quechua on the throne, and Denim just deciding to walk away from it all, and he's not assassinated, but and it seems like he's interested in joining Canopus and the White Knights on their to Zenobia to experience new lands. That's wow, that's crazy. I didn't know there was an end game where Denham's assassinated. That's wild to me. But
I think if you look Catch that's what happens.
Yeah, I love that ending. I think it's so
great.
good. Yeah.
It's so good.
that is very Shakespearean to have
It is indeed.
for him to rise to the top, having lost it all, and then sort of losing it all, losing his life as a result. That's I guess I got the quote unquote good ending. That's also sort of the most saccharine JRPG ending. I'm not sure. I'm happy with it now.
Yeah, I think I said in our Slack that like I got a good ending, but I don't think it was the good ending.
And
My favorite thing about my ending was Olivia admitting that she was in love with Denham. I thought that was adorable.
and it seemed to me, I'm not sure about this, and from what I had seen, it seems a bit dubious, but in my route, it seems that the this kind of former Bakram elite and profit kind of war profiteers were the ones that put that Wallister rebel in that throne room and led him to kill Denham. That's what it seemed like. It seemed like they kind of gave the orders for that. I'm not entirely sure. It seemed like it was purposefully a bit vague, but that's the way it seemed to me, which is quite interesting. And maybe it's not such a good ending.
There's this really great thing. I think it happens maybe right after that or right before that, like final scene. I think I'm remembering this correctly. There's it's just like a black screen with like white text, and it's just like all of these events were recorded in history as the Heim conflict, and like that's it. And it's like all of these like dozens and dozens of hours of me like fighting and like making friends, like making enemies, like and it felt like so like personal, and like that was like my whole life. But then it's just like the game tells you that it was just like 2 sentences in like a history book, like and I thought that was just like a really nice ending, and like the human cycle is just gonna continue, and like violence is gonna continue, and like my life was just like a tiny dot in the grand scheme of humanity. It's really bleak, but like also very poetic.
Yeah, just sort of the whole time is a flat circle. We are all but passengers on the wheel of fate kind of message is definitely present. And they also play around with the idea of fate in that sort of you make your own destiny, but everyone's like sort of time comes for everyone. It's sort of a bleak message, but also. But again, Matsuno just celebrating the details and putting all of this story planning in. I think that getting different endings is cool and interesting, but it's definitely more about the process than the product. In Tactics Ogre, this is a game where I was frustrated by the little things, but also really loved a lot of the little things. This is a really, really interesting RPG that I want to get into another topic here. Why has there not been a single Tactics Ogre or Ogre Battle release since this PSP remake? Like is it that forgotten and that sad? Because I disagree with that notion a little bit, just because of the reaction whenever RPG Fan posts Ogre stuff.
I think the answer is twofold. One is I believe that Square owns the license at this point.
Square published the PSP game.
Right, and I don't think that it's popular enough that they're going to invest the money in it. I mean, if they were going to do something, I think they would publish a Final Fantasy Tactics 2, like a true one. That would certainly bring in, I don't know, probably something like 50 times more money if I had to guess. You could even make it the same story, just like throw some chocobos in there. And that would be enough, and they would make way more money on it.
Yeah.
So
was there a Kickstarter or something with Matsuno at one point?
There was.
Remembering that?
There is still one going, technically.
Yeah, it was
Unsung story.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would call that a failed crowdfunding attempt because well, at least so far I think they're still saying it's going to be made, but so far they've far underdelivered on their promises.
That really concerns me about the Kickstarter that was announced today. So yeah.
We are recording this at the same day that a different legendary creator from the '90s made a Kickstarter for a future project that looks a little bit more promising than Unsung Story.
Oh,
Yeah, I wish everything.
Can we do a whole podcast on that right now?
We could. Let's at least finish this one first. But so what do we think is, like, let's say Matsuno gets allowed to make a full game again, which may not happen. Matsuno has had a lot of shine in Final Fantasy XIV. There's a Palace of the Dead deep dungeon based on the Palace of the Dead in this game, and Matsuno wrote 2 of the major side quest scenarios ongoing in Final Fantasy XIV today. But I think that maybe Final Fantasy XIV ended up being such a troubled project that I think Square Enix is hesitant to give him the keys to a nice car ever again. Is at least my suspicion, without any real evidence to that effect. But what do we if we get a new straight up Matsuno with Square Enix money kind of game? Is it another Ogre, another FF Tactics, or a completely separate game that references both or either or one?
I mean, I think that Tactics would be the most likely candidate, just because I think there's a lot of money there. But like, I think Tactics Ogre is dead. I mean, honestly, I mean, like, we were talking about this. I don't remember where I read this, or maybe it was in the last podcast. Like that, every single Tactics Ogre game is incredibly rare, and maybe it's popular with our audience, and it would be popular enough. But like, it's not going to be as popular as a Matsuno product that has the name Final Fantasy on it. It's just not.
Yeah, but I mean, part of me is thinking the 3 big Ogre games are episodes 5, 6, and 7. So they could go far into the future of this world or far into the past of this world and make whatever game they want and just call it Ogre. And but I wonder how much weight the Tactics Ogre battle name holds to anyone outside of our niche circle. Because I mean, let's face it, the four of us are active in the Japanese RPG loving community that really celebrate games like Tactics Ogre, but more casual fans of video games or even JRPGs might not have ever heard of these. They're a little obscure in the greater discussion. And
I guess that's my broader point.
Yeah.
I mean, like Final Fantasy, like everyone's heard of Final Fantasy.
I talked myself into agreeing with you, Zach.
And I think part of it is also just so many games have taken inspiration from Tactics Ogre, and then from Final Fantasy Tactics as well, that it could be that they just don't really see the market for it, because you have a lot of different strategy RPGs and strategy/tactics games now. You have your Disgaeas, you have a ton of indie projects, you have your Desperados, you have your Shadow Tactics. So and you have games that are that have some similar aesthetics and ideas, but are completely different, like Into the Breach. So it feels like they might be having cold feet about it because they don't feel the space for it to be for it to have the success that they'd want or something.
Maybe Babylon's Fall is secretly an Ogre Saga game, and they just haven't told us yet. And for probably 15 years, maybe more than 15 years, when I talk about RPGs having an end game that far exceeds the base game and has all of these exploitative, silly gameplay details, I would always compare them to Disgaea. But now I think that I've seen the original article. What I should have been doing all these years is comparing them to Tactics Ogre. So, do we have anything left to discuss? I mean, I think this game educated all of us, except for Nilson, who was way ahead of the curve compared to the sophomoric trio of the rest of us.
I mean, just like the volume of. I mean, I think I'm probably the lowest on this game of the 4 of us. Like, I think that the balance is totally off, and I think that I don't like the class progression system very much. But like the volume of things that I know came out of this game, like it's it's astounding how important it is, like in retrospect.
It's I played a bit of Final Fantasy Tactics this afternoon, just as kind of a refresher of like, okay, what are the differences in this game and how it plays and how the class system is. And one thing, um, playing Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions after playing um, Tactics Ogre PSP, that game is a lot slower than I remember and a lot slower than Tactics Ogre in terms of the gameplay. And then, there's the spell slowdown.
That's more to the specific to the PSP version of War of
Right.
the Lions, but your point still stands. This game
Right.
is faster moving moment to moment in gameplay than War of the Lions is.
Right. And I did find myself being like, wish I could have had that Wheel of Fate right now. But with Final Fantasy Tactics, I think it has more personality to it, and it has more of a sense of enjoyment and fun in a lot of ways, with especially with the classes slash jobs. Because in this one, we had talked about it last episode, but you can't be recruiting a powerful character and then just have them come in at level 1. And
Yeah.
whereas in Final Fantasy Tactics, there are a lot of skills that transfer over and characters join at different levels. This doesn't do that pretty much at all. So yeah, if you get a character, if you unlock Dunham's Lord class, you can use that, sure. But you have to get rid of all of your equipment. You have to equip some terrible things and start at level 1 from that and work your way up over like, I don't know, a dozen battles.
Yeah.
If you're on level 20 or something.
And this version apparently improved on that issue. So yeah.
Right. And that's pretty onerous. That's pretty unforgivable, in my opinion. I really liked a lot of things this game was doing, but I wish that it did not do that.
I really liked this game. I thought that the writing was really entertaining. I had fun going into the Warren Report and learning about the war before this war. I thought it was really good from a story perspective, and it was fun jumping back into a strategy RPG. I haven't played one in a while. I think the last one I really got deep into was South Park: The Fractured Butthole, which I'm
Great
not.
game. Great game.
Which is a good game, but still, it's been a minute since I
You reviewed it for the site, didn't you?
I did. But it's been a minute since I've played a strategy RPG, which is a genre I love, and so it was sort of fun falling back into one again. So this is a game that speaks to me to a degree, but there's a lot of frustrations, not limited to resetting classes to level 1 and how cumbersome crafting is, and how sort of just the volume of end game for rewards that maybe aren't worth the time investment that had me not sour on it by the end, but by the end I was ready to stop playing and I was not that motivated to go and explore other pathways, just because of again my personal wanting to get to other games on my list and the frustrations of parts of the end game of Let Us Cling Together. I think this game is great, but I think its influence sort of outsizes how good the game is as a standalone title. But I don't want to disrespect that influence or it as a game, because it's at the very, very least, it's a really, really good PSP strategy RPG. I don't think I wasted those 50 hours, but it's not my favorite game I've played for the podcast this year. Which is fair, because, I mean, Zach, Nier Automata was one of those games, right?
Yes, sir.
And Mother
I
3.
can think of like maybe one game you've played on the podcast that's better than that one. Maybe 2, maybe 3. I don't know.
It's been a very good year so far for me for Retro Encounter. I've played, I guess, if you count FF7 Remake, I guess 6 games for the podcast, and I've really enjoyed all of them. So it's and this is not a dark mark, but I think that at the 50-hour mark, I was ready to end it.
Yeah,
and
I think it is the weakest game I've played for Retro, personally. I mean, I liked it a lot. I think it was great, but like even compared to like I don't know. I like Grandia better, which is probably like the worst game I've played outside of this.
Oh,
I just
God.
play a lot of good games. I play a lot of good games for retro.
What's the worst game I've played for Retro Encounter? I'm not even sure. Now,
And that's like high praise. I mean,
I'm
seriously.
I'm gonna be oh boy I'm gonna be thinking about this for
The
hours
last
after we're done
story,
recording.
maybe.
I was really ready for the last story to end when I played that thing.
And that's a short game, so yeah.
Let's see. Definitely not that. I'm looking at a list now, which is definitely wasting my time for the podcast.
I know what mine is off the top of my head. It's definitely Wild Arms 3.
I like.
Sorry, Michael.
I begged out of that because I didn't have time.
Okay, it's definitely not that. Definitely not that.
It was, this isn't the best game that I've played for Retro Encounter because we've done Mother 3 or I've been on episodes with Mother 3 and Nier Automata and Vagrant Story. Hey, Matsuno. I think it still has its merit and its influence, and it does have quite a good story. And I think the end. We didn't even really talk about the end gauntlet. I love the Hanging Gardens.
Did you? What?
I loved it.
It was 16 fights long.
Yeah, it was 16 fights, and I think they could have made it 6, and it would have been.
There's
2. It would have been.
There's
fine.
a way. There's a way to make it that, but I didn't do that. I did the full 16 gauntlet. I had a blast with it.
All right. I did not have a blast with 6. It starts out with 10, and only the first and 10th of those 10 have like named characters with important dialogue. So like I think they could have removed like 8 of those 10, and then for the last 6 maybe cut out a couple of those. So like I would have preferred if the final gauntlet was 6 or 8 fights instead of 16. But okay, if we're talking about what the worst Retro Encounter game I've ever played was and how many fights the final fight should have been, maybe it's time to end the episode. I did really enjoy my time with Tactics Ogre, but I'm not about to dive into it because I have other games I'm diving into right now, one of which is Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. We are doing 2 episodes in a row on Superstar Saga in the first 2 weeks of August.
Can't wait to listen to those.
I played that game 15 years ago, or maybe a little longer, and I'm enjoying it right now. But I am seeing the wrinkles a little bit more clearly than I did 15 years ago. So
I reviewed the remake for the site and I loved it. So I don't know.
I'm playing the remake and I like a lot of it, but it will not be universal praise on those episodes. And if anything, I'm one of the more positive people on those episodes. But I'm gonna leave that to your imagination. In the next 2 weeks, we're doing 2 episodes on Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Those are episodes 248 and 249. And if my knowledge of integers is as good as it was when I was a student, after that comes episode 250. We are doing a mailbag episode for episode 250. So please send us emails. Send them to retro@rpgfan.com. And we will read all of the emails that we receive on air and respond to any questions that you might include within those emails. And by the end of the episode, we will probably come up with a game or a pool of games that we will have a future Retro Encounter game journal duo on, probably in December or January. So please send in those emails to retro@rpgfan.com for episode 250. You can if you want to engage with us in other ways besides email, you can comment on the boards, visit the RPG Fan Facebook page, visit Instagram, Twitter, Discord, our Twitch channel. And Nilson and Joe, you as RPG Fan social media staff, you are very active, posting on many or if not all of those venues. There are a lot of ways to experience RPG Fan besides just listening to Retro Encounter. And speaking of listening to RPG Fan things, there's also Random Encounter, a podcast about randomness, Rhythm Encounter, a podcast about RPG music, and Phoenix Edge, a weekly podcast mostly focused on current events. Please review Retro Encounter and those other 3 podcasts on iTunes or Google Play or however you are listening. We love feedback. Please give us criticism. Please engage with us however you wish. But if you want to engage with the 4 panelists directly, what's the best way to do so? Let's tell the listeners exactly that, starting with you, Joe.
You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Discord as @EvaLeast, EVA, little underline thing, LEAST. Underscore thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you just forget the names of punctuation. It happens.
Oh, I need some food.
All right, before I forget the difference between a colon and a semicolon, Nilson, how can listeners reach you?
Definitely follow the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, rpgfan.com. Me personally, you can find me at Nilson, Nilson .itch.io. It's where I host all my like weird RPGs.
All right, and Zach, how can listeners reach you?
The best way is probably email, zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Discord at zachw.
And listeners, if you want to reach me, talk about podcast things, watch me post about RPG fan things, get very, very annoyed at Washington, D.C. sports teams, the best way to follow me is Twitter. I am at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs other times, and on RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. Whew. Well, the four of us clung together and we got through 2 podcasts about this very, very interesting video game.
Oh, stop.
Was I trying a little too hard? I think I was. All right, let's
Are we gonna have a 4-part harmony? Are we gonna have to do the 4-part harmony?
No one wants that except maybe you, Joe. Can you just do it by yourself?
No, because it's 4 parts, Zach. We need to all do it because as
we're
I probably
clinging
made this
together.
already. No, we're singing together.
Okay. Find us some Hitoshi Sakimoto sheet music. But for now, thank you, good night, and good luck.